It was 1 inch, Karen. 1 inch you destroyed your own life over. The entire street stood silent as the measuring tape shook in her hand. She expected fear. Instead, I smiled, because I already knew how this would end. If you love powerful stories, you don't want to miss this. But before we continue, tell us where you are watching from. It makes us happy to see how far our stories travel. Please like, comment, and subscribe. 3 days earlier, Karen fined me for my fence being 1 inch too tall. I asked politely which rule I broke. She laughed so hard neighbors came outside. That laugh is why I hired a surveyor, a lawyer, and a retired city inspector. Turns out Karen's own house violated 5 regulations: her deck, her driveway slope, her illegal shed. But I stayed quiet and let her push. Today was the HOA hearing she scheduled to embarrass me publicly. Instead, the county compliance truck parked behind her car. The officers didn't look at me. They walked straight to her. Then the inspector asked if she wanted to measure her violations first or mine. That was when the neighbors started recording. Karen's smile cracked like thin ice. I leaned closer and whispered, "You should have stopped at 1 inch." She realized this wasn't about a fence anymore. It was about everything she'd done to everyone. And today, for the first time, Karen understood what losing control actually felt like in front of the entire. Karen tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin and shaky. The inspector unfolded a thick folder and began reading violations like a grocery list: illegal deck extension, drainage redirection toward neighboring yards, unapproved storage structure, expired permit on her driveway expansion. Each word landed like a hammer. Neighbors who once feared her now stepped closer, phones raised higher. Someone whispered, "So she knew all this time?" The county officer calmly placed a bright orange notice on her front gate. Karen's face went pale. She kept glancing at me like I was supposed to stop this. I just folded my arms. Then came the first real twist. The retired city inspector I hired spoke up and asked the county team if they wanted historical records. He handed over copies of old complaints Karen had personally dismissed while serving as HOA president. Complaints from elderly residents, from single parents, from families she fined repeatedly. The officers read silently. One of them actually shook his head. Karen snapped. She pointed at me and shouted that I was targeting her, that I was jealous, that I was trying to ruin her life. That was when my lawyer finally stepped forward. He announced a pending civil review against the HOA board for selective enforcement and harassment. Gasps moved through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. But the funniest part, the sweet comeback, came from Mrs. Alvarez, the quietest neighbor on the street. She walked up, looked Karen dead in the eyes, and said softly, "All this over 1 inch?" The crowd didn't laugh loudly. They didn't need to. The silence was worse. Karen realized she wasn't feared anymore. She was exposed, and the real consequences hadn't even started yet. Karen's hands started shaking as more county vehicles pulled onto the street. Not flashing lights, not sirens, just quiet, official presence, which somehow felt worse. One officer approached her slowly and asked her to step aside to discuss immediate compliance deadlines. Karen tried to argue, but her voice kept cracking. The same woman who once fined people for mailbox paint shades couldn't even finish a sentence. Then came the second twist. The interim county housing representative announced that due to multiple documented complaints and evidence of selective enforcement, the HOA itself was being placed under state review. The crowd froze. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was bigger. Board members who stood beside her during every meeting suddenly stepped back. One even quietly got into his car and drove away. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Karen turned toward me again, but this time there was no anger, just panic. The kind that comes when someone realizes the rules they weaponized are now being used properly. Mrs. Alvarez crossed her arms and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Funny how rules matter now." A small ripple of laughter moved through the neighbors. Not cruel, just final, like a chapter closing. The county posted an official review notice on the community board. Karen stared at it like it was written in another language. Karen stood frozen as the county officer handed her the final packet. Mandatory correction deadlines, financial penalties if ignored, possible removal from HOA leadership pending investigation results. Her fingers trembled so badly she dropped the papers. But the final twist came quietly. The county representative announced a temporary oversight committee made up of residents, volunteers chosen from formal complaint records. Mrs. Alvarez was selected. So was Mr. Jenkins, who Karen once fined for holiday decorations. And then my name was called. Karen's head snapped toward me. Not angry, not powerful, just small. For weeks after that day, contractors showed up at her house fixing violations she once mocked others for. Her illegal shed was removed first, then the deck. Then the driveway was partially demolished to correct drainage. Every morning, neighbors walked past quietly. No taunting, no revenge speeches, just reality. The HOA held an emergency meeting 2 weeks later. Karen didn't sit at the front table anymore. She sat in the second row, silent, watching. The new interim board voted to refund dozens of unfair fines issued over the last 2 years. When my refund check arrived, it wasn't about the money. It was about closure. The last time I saw Karen, she was measuring her fence herself. Carefully. Slowly. Making sure it followed every rule exactly. She never spoke to me again, and honestly, she didn't need to, because everyone already knew the story. All of it. Over 1 inch. Sometimes downfall doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives with paperwork, witnesses, and the quiet moment when someone realizes they were never untouchable at all. Please like, comment, and subscribe.